We're in week 2 of our new series called Shapes. And in this series, we're asking a very critical question. And that question is this: what shapes me? What shapes me? It's a question that I'm going to keep putting in front of you through the entirety of this series. It's a question that we all should wrestle with and wrestle down. Why am I who I am? Why do I do the things that I do? Why do the things that come out of my mouth come out of my mouth? Why do the things that go off inside of my mind, why do they go off inside of my mind? What shapes me? And last week we looked at the most formative force in our life, the most formative thing that shapes us as people, and that was the heart. What did we learn last week? We learned that the heart is central. That at the center of our lives, the very essence of who we are, it all flows out of our heart. So, with that being true, shouldn't we be aware of what's in our heart? Shouldn't we also be aware of what's shaping our hearts? Jesus one time was asked point blank from a guy. He said, "What's the greatest commandment?" In essence, what the guy was asking, and he was saying, "What's the most important thing about living?" And what did Jesus say? He said, "You shall love the Lord your God with what? With all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength." You see, the understanding of a Jew would have been that the heart was central, and that the heart wasn't something that just pumped blood. The heart was the essence of who you are. It was the inner being of who you are. So Jesus was saying that the most important thing in life, the center, the greatest thing about you, the most formative force in your life is that you love me with all your heart. And then another time, Jesus was talking about the heart, and he says that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So our heart follows our treasure. And so the heart is central. Like we've got to understand that. We've got to really own that. We've got to realize that everything flows out of the heart. King Solomon was the son of King David. Most of us are familiar with David. He's the guy that, killed Goliath and became a great king. And his son Solomon became a great king. He reigned for 40 years. He was one of the wealthiest men to ever live, certainly the wealthiest man of his era. And God gave Solomon, because of his heart for God gave Solomon a blank check and said, "Solomon, ask anything you want, I'll give it to you. What do you want?" And what did Solomon say? He said, "I want wisdom and knowledge to lead your people. That's what I would want." And God was so grateful and so happy about Solomon's answer. He, of course, gave Solomon great wisdom, and he gave Solomon great knowledge. Such wisdom and such knowledge that kings and kingdoms came to learn from Solomon. Solomon wrote 3,000 proverbs. We're going to look at one of them today. He wrote 1,005 songs. Worship team. This guy had a phenomenal discography, okay? Like, this guy had albums upon albums, okay? 1,005 songs, okay? This guy was brilliant, and people flocked to him. They wanted to learn from him. And Solomon, was given knowledge, was given wisdom by God, said these words. And we looked at this text last week shortly, but we're going to take a little bit deeper dive today on this text. He said, above all else, guard your heart. Above all else, guard your heart. For everything you do flows from it. Solomon is teaching his boys, and we are on the downdraft, the receiving end. He's telling his son, "Listen, son, above everything, I want you to guard your heart." And again, when Solomon refers to the heart, it's the same concept of the heart that Jesus was referring to. He really means the inner core of a person, the thoughts, the feelings, the desires, the will that make up a person. And if you start to look at some of the original Hebrew of this text, you can look in this. It first says above all else. It's the word makal, and it literally means above everything. Before anything, like paramount in your life, above all else. And then there's a word that's attached to it, Makal Mishmar, and that means above everything. The word Mishmar is the word guard, and it's this idea of looking after intently. It's the idea of guarding something. It would be the idea of you posting up and guarding. It's the idea of what I'm going to do when a boy tries to show up to my house and date my daughter. I'm going to guard her, okay? You know what I'm saying? I'm going to guard her, okay? So it says above all else, Makal Mishmar, above all else, guard your heart. Why? Why? Because everything you are flows from the heart. Everything that shapes you begins within the heart. There's another couple of words here that are very interesting and brings us to the shape we're going to talk about today. It's the word Tatziat Haim, and you're going to have to excuse my Hebrew. I didn't just cough up a hairball, but you're supposed to, you know. But Tatziat Haim, it means the issues of life. But what's interesting is the word Tatziat. The word Tatziat, it mainly refers to the borders of a territory, the boundaries of a city. So what Solomon is saying is so much deeper than maybe you and I realize at a glance. What he's saying is that the condition of your heart, again, determines the shape of your heart. In other words, your heart will map out or set the course for your life. So you should guard it. You should create some boundaries. How do I guard my heart? Well, I guard my heart one way by creating borders. Tatziat. Borders, boundaries. And if to guard your heart means to watch over it closely, to protect it, it would be wise then to create those boundaries. Now what do I mean by boundaries? I mean by boundaries, property lines. Maya mentioned an author, Dr. Henry Cloud. I'm going to borrow from an illustration that Dr. Henry Cloud uses in regards to boundaries. I highly recommend the book that she mentioned, by the way, Boundaries, by Dr. Henry Cloud. Dr. Cloud talks about boundaries being a lot like property lines. And let's say that this square, by the way, the title of the message today is Square Up. Can y'all say square up? Square up. Title of the message, Square Up. Dr. Cloud talks about the fact that we need to have boundaries. The way I say it, it's just cooler. Square up. Now boundaries are like property lines. And what does a property line do? Property lines do a lot of things for us. I'm going to ask Dakota to come up. And Dakota, bring your property line with you. Square up. So Dakota's going to square up, and I'm going to square up. Don't split those tight pants, big guy. So we're talking about focus. So we're talking about what? We're talking about guarding our heart. We're talking about the importance of understanding that so goes our heart, so goes our lives. Our heart maps out borders, creates our lives. So it's so important then that we guard it, that we create boundaries. So a boundary is like a property line. Let's just say that because we're squared up, we have our property lines. Let's say I'm in my house and Dakota's in his house. And between our houses is a property line. And what this property line does is, first, it defines where one person's property begins and one person's property ends. So this is mine and that is yours. Without property lines, without boundaries, we could get lost in that, right? I used to live in Texas, and we had some land, and for a while we enjoyed, it was about 10 acres. To the east of us, no one lived there. And then finally someone lived there, and honestly, where our property land began and ended, we really kind of got lost on it. I was actually mowing a part of a field that wasn't mine. It didn't make any sense, right? But then they put a property line as the guy began to build, and he's like, this is my property. And I'm like, well, thank you very much. I don't have to mow your property anymore, right? So property lines, they tell us where property begins and ends. They also define ownership. They define ownership. So if it's within my border, if it's my heart, guess who owns my heart? It's me and Dakota. We're friends. But your heart is your heart. My heart is my heart. If I don't have boundaries, however, things can get blurred. Property lines also define control. Now, wouldn't it be weird if I just showed up at Dakota's house one day and decided to put on an addition? People are like, bro, what are you doing? Man, I'm taking control of your house. He's like, no, you can't. This is my house. You have your house and I have my house. So property lines define control. Property lines also define responsibility. What if Dakota were to call me and say, hey, 2 weeks have passed, the yard needs mowing. Pace, come mow my yard. To which I'm going to say, bro, mow your own yard. Your yard is your yard. You mow your yard. Now, if I was doing him a favor, that's one thing. But Dakota has got to take responsibility for his yard. Because why? It's on his property. In our lives, our hearts require boundaries. We've got to learn to square up. Because if we don't square up, let me just show you this. If I can walk over this. Come on, y'all. Boom. Let's go. Let's pretend Dakota and I don't have boundaries. But let's say that I have some major issues, which I might. If he doesn't have boundaries, and if I don't have boundaries, let's say my issues that I'm a control freak, and that often manifests itself in anger. If he doesn't have boundaries, then he doesn't know what he owns, and he doesn't know what he's responsible for, and he doesn't know where he begins and I end, and so on and so forth. So what I can do is I can come in and I can now invade his space with my problems. And so now all of a sudden, my problems become Dakota's problems. My dysfunction now is living and is very close to Dakota. Okay? Sorry for the coffee breath. And this is what life looks like without boundaries. Our dysfunctions, our problems spill over. Now listen, I'm not talking about sharing one another's burdens. The Bible tells we're supposed to do that. But what I am saying is that if we understand that we are to guard our heart, guarding our heart means creating boundaries, having appropriate boundaries in our lives. And in doing so, what a boundary helps me do, and this is what we're going to focus on, it helps me understand what I'm responsible for. Right. Okay? What I'm responsible for and who I'm responsible to. Thank you, Dakota. So we're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about squaring up. I mean, maybe you love someone who is, let's say they're abusing drugs or is addicted to pornography or has an anger issue. You name the problem. And if you don't have any boundaries, then you're going to end up with all the pain of their problems. And that's not right. And God didn't create you to have to live on the downdraft, the receiving end of everyone else's problems. Now listen, again, I'm not talking about bearing one another's burdens. We're supposed to do that. We do that. But I'm talking about what you're responsible for, because oftentimes what we do with the people that we love, because we don't have defined boundaries, in an effort to rescue them, we get hurt and they don't get help. Because we just bail them out all the time. We just help them all the time. So why should I square up? It's a great question. Well, I need to square up because squaring sets a limit. Squaring up creating boundaries in my life, it sets a limit. Boundaries begin to set a limit. They begin to say, wait a minute, whose problem is this? Can we define the dysfunction that is going on in this relationship and just say, this is your problem? Yes, I am happy. I love you. I'm happy to help you. But you need to own your problem. You need to take responsibility. And part of you taking responsibility is me first saying, this is my house. This is my heart. And I'm responsible for my heart. Can I just help somebody that's an enabler today? You are not responsible for other people's behavior. We always feel bad for the enabler, but the enabler oftentimes is getting the kickback of identity because they love to rescue. They love to be the rescue, the knight in shining armor, the one who always has the answer, the one who comes along. Dr. Cloud tells a story about a client that he had. He's a psychologist. He had a story of a guy who he comes in and the father's like, I'm just like beside myself. He actually got another son with him and his wife. He's like, I've got a son and he's a drug addict and he's flunked out of 2 schools and he's just a mess. And Dr. Cloud thought it was the son that was sitting there and he's like, okay, well let's talk. He's like, no, that's not me. It's my brother. Well, where's your brother? Well, my brother's in Vail skiing. And so the guy's like, Dr. Cloud's like, oh, he's in Vail skiing. Okay, well, talk to me about the 2 schools he flunked out of. Tell me just a little bit about that. And as the dad began to talk, he's like, yeah, he fell out of this and fell out of that. And so, I love my son. I want the best for my son. So I got him in another school. And I paid for his school, and he flunked out of that school. And he says, my son just needs help. He needs his help. Would you help him? And he said, I can't help your son. And the guy was like, what are you talking about? You can't help my son. This is what you do. He said, your son doesn't have any problems. What are you talking about, my son? My son's a drug addict. He doesn't have any problems. Your son is in Vail skiing right now. And can I tell you who shows up in my office? It's people with problems. He said, the problem is you're on the receiving end of your son's problems, and you, because you don't have boundaries, have enabled him, and as a result, live in the consequence of his problems, and he has no problems. So you're enabling. Do you see how this works? See, boundaries sets limits. When we don't square up, we enable other people's problems by living in the consequences of their problems, and as a result, what happens? We get hurt, and they don't get help. It's plain and simple. That's a long sentence up there, I know. So you're not going to bring the abuse into my life. I love you. You're not going to continue in your angry, tyrants. You're not going to continue to spew your toxicity without taking responsibility. Throughout Scripture, we see 2 lines of God's character, and they always run parallel. This is very important for you to understand about God and who He is and how He loves. John 1:14 tells us this about Jesus. The Word became flesh, and He dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory. Glory as the only Son from the Father, full of what? Grace and truth. What you need to know about God is the character of God, the love of God, always has 2 things that run in parallel, and that's grace, and that is truth. That is mercy, and that is righteousness. So what that means is that when God loves, He also holds people responsible. Because if God never loved without holding people responsible, then God would be codependent. God's not codependent. And if God held people responsible without loving them, you remember they go parallel, they're running nonstop all the time, grace and truth, mercy and righteousness. If God held people responsible without love, then He would be a tyrant and a mean judge, and He would just condemn us all, which we all deserve. But instead, what does He do? He loves us. But because He loves us, He holds us to a standard. Because He loves us, He knows that standard is impossible. It's called holiness. He loves us so much that He sent His Son to be the standard. But he then says, okay, receive my grace, but walk in truth. Receive my grace. You'll watch this. Every time that Jesus healed someone, every time that he touched someone, one time he touched, a lady in John 4, and she was someone known with, a pretty, shady background. I mean, she slept around with a lot of guys. And Jesus basically touched her, healed her, loved her, received her, removed the labels, showed her what love looks like. He poured out his grace. Instead of throwing a stone, he didn't throw a stone. But what did he say? He says, I love you, forgive me. Who condemns you? No one condemns me. Then what did he say? He says, go and sin no more. You see, he loved her, but then he also held her responsible. It's grace and it's truth. So what does the Bible call when we sin? Trespass. You see, the border. You see, squaring up. When we don't square up, it's easy for us to trespass against one another. And it's happening all the time. And it's happening in your life, and it's happening in my life. And it's shaping us. It's shaping us. It's our lack of boundaries that oftentimes are shaping our hearts to do and say and to act in ways that are not God's best for us. We need to understand that. So squaring up also tells me that I'm responsible for what I'm responsible for, and also who I'm responsible to. Okay, so if you're hurting me, then I have a responsibility to let you know you're hurting me. I don't have a responsibility for your behavior because I own my heart. You need to own it. You need to own your heart. No one else can direct your heart. No one else can feed the pursuit of your heart. No one else can pursue Jesus for you. You got to own your heart. You got to take responsibility for your heart. And what that means is when someone hurts you, when someone steps over the property line, you have a boldness to say, wait a minute, I love you, but get off my property. Please hear what I'm saying. Hey, I love you, but if I'm going to help you, my heart has to be healthy. So you're not going to bring your dysfunction into my heart. I'm going to own my part. You own your part. I'm not going to enable you. And this is what having boundaries or what squaring up looks like. You know, I've had an opportunity to do just a few interventions in my life. One with a family member. And why did I do the intervention? Well, I did the intervention because I love this family member very, very much. But the intervention wasn't just about letting her know that she was sick. It was also letting her know that her sickness was impacting my life, was devastating me. And what I was responsible for was to say, I love you. I'll do everything I can for you. But you need to know what your problem is doing to me. I want you to hear it all. I want you to know what I think about. I want you to know the anxiety you give me. I want you to know I'm worried about you nonstop. I want you to know that your problem embarrasses me. I want you to know these things. And that's me guarding my heart. Again, I'm just talking about what you're responsible for. Another talk on how to carry people's burdens. But I'm trying to help you understand what it means to guard your heart. It certainly has got to do with what comes in and what comes out. But we've got to establish the property line first. You see, I think oftentimes we misunderstand hurt and harm. You know, when I was in college, I played basketball. I loved to play basketball. And me and some guys were messing around one day, and we lowered the goal. It was the only way I could dunk without an alley-oop. And we lowered the goal about 9 feet, and we were just playing dunk ball. A lot of fast breaks. And I was actually playing in Tevas, not smart. And I went up and I dunked the ball. It was beautiful. I'd score myself a 10. And but when I landed with my foot this way. And you know that Tevas are not meant to handle that type of weight. And so the full weight of my body landed like this. And so essentially what happened is that Teva folded in half, and so did my foot. And I broke every bone across my foot. Now, if you were to, don't do it now because it would be gross. If you were to grab a hold of your foot and feel it, it's pretty firm. When I grabbed I immediately hit the ground, threw my shoe off, grabbed my foot, and it was like mush. At that point, I fainted. Okay? So here's the deal. I ended up having to have surgery, put 5 pins in my foot. Out of surgery, like immediately out of surgery, what do they say? You got to get up. You got to get up. I don't want to get up. My foot hurts. You got to get up. Why? It's part of the healing process. You got to get up. You got to get out of bed. I don't want to get up. Let me just hang out right here. Y'all just keep bringing me food. I'll watch ESPN. We're good. Yeah, I don't want to get up. But they made me get up, and then they put me a cast, and then I had to, not bear weight on that cast. But then they moved me to a walking cast, and I didn't want to go to the walking cast. I'm like, do we really have to go to the walking cast? Because I've gotten used to these crutches, and when I put my foot down, it hurts. No, you got to go to the walking cast. So then I went to the walking cast, the big blue shoe. And I did that for a while. But then the time came to get the blue shoe off, and now you got to walk and bear the full weight. Now, was my physical therapist hurting me? Yes. Was my physical therapist harming me? No. My physical therapist, by hurting me, was helping me heal. And, we have this thought that I love him, and it hurts me to see him go through what he's going through. And so what do? We say, don't put pressure on it. When maybe what they need to do is feel the pain. Maybe it's the pain that puts them on a pathway of healing. So it helps me understand. Squaring up also keeps the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. Okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about why we should square up. Squaring up keeps the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. I want you to think about your house. Okay? Why do you like your house? If you don't like your house, don't tell us. Okay? Why do you like your house? You like your house because it guards your stuff. Again, what did Solomon say? Above all else, what? Guard your heart. Put boundaries around it. Guard your heart. So if someone's going to try to do something hurtful, you say no. What a boundary does is it says no. King David in Psalm 101 basically says, no one who practices deceit are welcome in my home. They're not going to be in my presence. Liars can go to hell. No. He's saying, listen, liars don't live in my house. People who practice deceit, they're not going to be in my inner circle. They're not going to be welcome. But then he goes on to say, faithful people, those who are faithful to God are the people who will be with me. Okay? You see, boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries have doors. And you decide who comes in and who comes out. Some of you need to kick some people out. It doesn't mean that they have to be out of your life forever, but they need it out of your heart. But the Bible does instruct us, and we'll talk about this next week, that there are some, a very few, but there are some who have to be in the inner circle. There are some that have to be within the property line with you because you can't do life alone. But in guarding our heart, we got to be wise in who we allow be close. Because boundary lines help us understand, and it keeps the good things in and keeps the bad things out. And we make choices to who we let in and who we keep out. And some of us just simply need to uninvite some dysfunctional people just out of the property line. You can still say hello. You can still love them. You can still be friends with them. But you need to learn to guard your heart. Because the truth is if you don't guard your heart and you let their unhealth, there's some of you that are new believers here today. Listen, our heart of this house is to love the lost. It's our passion to seek and save the lost. There always will be a seat for those who are far from God. There always will be. It's what Jesus was most passionate about. It's what we are most passionate about. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to let someone who doesn't have maybe you're new to Christ and you're establishing new values, a whole different standard of living. If you are still running with the same people who are doing what you used to struggle with, it's not a good idea. Okay, we'll talk about more of that next week. I'm just trying to help you understand that boundaries set limits. Boundaries help me understand and help me keep the good things in and the bad things out. So in your life, you have to be sure that you have boundaries, listen, that are binding evil out. Get that picture. What does a boundary do? A boundary creates a property line. It's a border. A scripture that is oftentimes, misquoted is what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Part of what that's talking about is you and I have the power through boundaries, through squaring up on what we bind out of our heart. I'm going to bind out of my heart certain evils. Okay, I'm going to bind out of my heart the things I struggle with, the temptations that I have, and I'm going to bind them out. Doesn't mean I don't still love those people, but I'm going to bind them out. And if they're bound out there, they'll be bound in heaven. If they're loosed here, they're going to be loosed in heaven. But there's some obstacles to this, and let me turn the corner here. There's some reasons why we don't set boundaries. We don't set boundaries, number one, because we have a fear of a loss of a relationship. We're afraid we're gonna lose the friendship. We're afraid they're gonna walk out on us. And many of us don't we don't square up because we're just afraid that if we create a boundary in this relationship, we'll lose the relationship. And so we end up being codependent and we end up being enablers. Listen, we all desperately need people in our lives. As a matter of fact, 1 Peter 4:10 says that we are the stewards of God's grace, His manifold grace. Just look at 1 Peter 4:10 at some point. See, God gives us grace through each other. Think about that. The grace of God comes to you through other people. So a great question to ask about the people around you in my boundaries are people both vertical, in other words, they're healthy in a relationship with God, but they're also horizontal, and that they give to me what God gave to them. You see, if they're just vertical relationships or if they're just horizontal relationships without vertical responsibility and understanding of God's grace and God's love, it's going to be a drain on you. It's going to create a bad situation for you. So we have this idea that if I create this boundary, then I may lose the relationship. And guys, we're guilty of this. Guys, we're like, man, yeah, I understand. We know we need people. I got my wife. I got my dog. That's all I need. Hey, I get it. That's safe. Dogs don't talk. I get it. I get it. But number one, it's not fair to your poor dog. And number two, it's certainly not fair to your wife. Number three, you need more people. I'm not saying about a lot, but you need a few men. Ladies, you need a few women who, when you fall in the well, they jump down in the well with you.
That's right. That's good.
When you fall in the well, they come down in the well and they empathize with you. What do? They give you grace in the moment. Yes. Someone that doesn't have a vertical relationship with God won't do that. Yeah. But somebody that does understands, hey, I've been in the pit too. Yep. Let me jump down in there. That's right. We're going to get out of it together. Yep. That's healthy. So I'm going to jump down to the pit. My brother fell in the pit. He fell. Or he chose to go to the pit. Come on, a lot of the times that mistakes we make are just dumb choices, right? I'm going to go down in the pit. I'm going to show them empathy. This is what's so beautiful about Christ's love for us. He jumped down in the pit. Okay? He took on us. He says, hey, I'm getting you out of this. Okay? He became our sin. He became our pain. He took it on himself. And then he rescued us. So we struggle with this because of fear of a loss of a relationship. We also struggle with it because of a fear of conflict. A lot of us are conflict avoidant. I am not, because I learned in my house that you can't be. In my house, it was survival of the fittest. You know what I'm saying? But I learned, I get a fairly good read on people most of the time. My wife is a great read on people. If I'm uncertain about one of y'all, I'm like, hey, Sarah, come on over. If I ever bring Sarah over in a conversation and we're new in the relationship, just know she's going, no, I'm just kidding. That's not fair to Sarah. That's not fair to Sarah. She has a great read. It's called discernment. But I learned discernment sitting at the table. My father had anger issues, okay? I lived in a household where I kind of walked and had to, walk on tiptoes, and it was always about reading Dad, and I could tell by the way the door shut. That was the first indicator, okay? I certainly could tell by his body language. I could tell by the way he carried himself. I could tell by the way he put his keys down on the table. All these things were things that I learned to read, and it created some dysfunction in me. And so I've learned I'm certainly not afraid of conflict. I lived in conflict. We all deal with conflict in different ways. Some of us are conflict avoidant. Some of you are Italians and you just throw stuff. You just throw stuff, We just deal with it a lot of different ways. But when we think about being afraid of conflict that has truth attached to it, what we've got to understand is that sometimes it requires conflict to get truth across. And it's why Paul said in Galatians 1, he said, am I living to please God or am I living to please man? If I was living to please man, I wouldn't be a servant of Jesus. So what's that mean? Paul says, I'm going to offend some people. There's going to be some conflict. And I'm going to be okay with it because I'm living to please God. Another reason I got to move on. Another reason is guilt. We struggle with guilt. That's why we don't have boundaries. We struggle with guilt. Christians struggle so much from guilt, but we should be the most free from it. We're afraid, I just love them. I worry them. I'm afraid that if I say no to you, I'll damage you. If I say no to you, if I create a boundary, then I'm going to discourage you. I'm going to depress you. I'm going to disillusion you. If you're not setting boundaries, though, because you're feeling guilty, you're, again, confusing hurt with harm, right? Hurt and harm are very different. Listen, CrossFit hurts me every week. It hurts me. But in hurting me, what's it doing? It's helping me. It's allowing me to be able to do that right there, okay? It's helping me. Growing Christians, listen, controversial statement, but take it in context. Christians are supposed to hurt each other. As iron sharpens iron, so when men. You see, I've got some men in my life that'll get up in my gravy. They'll ask me some uncomfortable questions. I don't want to go there right now. No, we're going there. They ask me hard questions. What are they doing? They're hurting me to help me. And someone who walks on eggshells all the time, here's the deal. The bottom line is you just don't trust people. Right? And you got to learn not to do that. The word trust means actually to be without care. So I don't need to edit with my close friends. I don't need to be PC with them. Right? You need these kind of people in your life. I don't need to edit with them. I don't have to be PC. I can just say what I'm feeling, and they know my heart, but they correct me, and they encourage me, and they strengthen me. They hurt me, and in their hurting me, they help me. We fragilize people. We think people are weaker than they really are. Think about how you handled the last time you got hurt. Listen, you're sitting here, you're a big boy, you're a big girl. Quit being so afraid. And stop allowing your fear of hurting them. You're fragilizing them and you're keeping them from healing, okay? So how do I begin to square up? I've got to finish up. How do I finish to square up? Number one, monitor the lies. Monitor your lies. Over this next week, I want you to ask this question. When did you say yes when you should have said no? Monitor the lies. Maybe that's just some homework. When in the last week did I say yes when I should have said no? When did I take an appointment when I should have said no? When did I reply to the email when I should have waited on replying on the email because I don't have the bandwidth right now to deal with that email? When did I say yes when I should have said no? Monitor the lies. And then now, why did I not say no? And why did I say yes? Oh, I don't want them to leave. I can't say no. Oh, I don't want them to think badly. I don't want them to think I'm a bad pastor because I won't go to coffee with them. It's either going to be coffee or be late and come home late again. You see what I'm saying? It all bleeds. It's for you. It's for me. But if I say no, they might leave. If I say no, then I might hurt their feelings. If I say no, they may think poorly of me. That's not healthy. It's not healthy. So monitor your lies. People they can't say no are by definition liars. How are you doing today? I'm fine. I'm blessed. No, you're not. You're messed up. You don't have to give them that answer. Number 2, and Dakota come up to get me off this platform. Use the word no every day. Use the word no every day. If you study neuroscience, you're going to see that so much of what they're discovering about the mind simply mirrors what God has already said. If you can learn on focusing to say no each time, it'll get easier to say no. No, 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 no. How about no? Right? No. Hey, do you want to? No. Hey, can we? No. Hey, how about we? Hey, today's not a good time. But how about tomorrow? Or you know what, this week, I'm really busy. Your relationship, it really does mean a lot to me. I value you. But I can't do it. As much as I want to, I just can't. No. I freed some people up right there. Just say no. And sometimes it's a no with an appointment. And sometimes it's just no. And we got to be okay with that. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed by the pattern of this world, but be transformed by what? The renewing of your mind. We need to learn to say no. Number 3, find out who you're giving power to. Who are you giving power to? And why are you giving them power? Why are you afraid to tell them no? Who are you giving power to? Galatians 1:10, for I'm not seeking the approval of man or of God. If I'm trying to please man, if I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Listen, take the power back because you will never make them happy anyway. Just take the power back. Quit giving them power. Number 4, when someone needs something from you, ask yourself 4 quick questions, and we're going to be done with this. This is more teachy than preachy, by the way. 4 quick questions when someone asks you to do something. Number 1, first question. Number 1, is this something they can provide for themselves? It's a great question. Hey, Mom, will you? No. Go make your own peanut butter sandwich. I'm just saying. Number 2, do I have the resource? Before I say yes, do I have the time? Or is this going to overextend me? Do I have the money? Do I have the bandwidth? Do I have the energy? Number 3, how am I feeling? The Bible says that I'm supposed to be what? A cheerful giver. If I'm going to give, how am I feeling? Is this coming out of an abundance of love? Or is this coming out of a place of manipulation? How am I feeling? Why, if I say yes, why did I say yes? Did I say yes to appease them? Or did I say yes to serve them as Christ has served me? Big difference. And number 4, what is the fruit of my giving? You see, Jesus wants you to have a return on everything. What's the fruit of my giving? I love seeing people take pictures of the screen. It's homework. So your homework, the homework is, when did I say yes when I should have said no? And then the follow-up question is, and why did I say yes? Why did I say it? Why can I not learn? What is keeping me from learning to square up, to have boundaries in my life? Above all else, guard your heart. For out of your heart flows the issues of life. Your heart maps your future. God's got a great future for you. But he says, hey, listen, you got to walk in grace, and grace I give you freely. But you also got to walk in truth. And you got to own it. You got to take responsibility. There's some things you got to walk away from, and some new things you got to walk towards. my prayer is that as we continue in this series, we've looked at the heart. That was the shape last week. This week we looked at the square. Next week we're going to look at the circle, okay? And we're going to deep dive. We're going to look a little bit further into relationships. We're going to get into this a little bit more.